Have you ever looked over at your pet and they were doing something weird? Maybe they were making some funny motions, perking their ears, or barking at you. Your pet just might have been trying to communicate with you. Animals may not have an advanced way of saying things, but there are still many ways in which they are able to communicate with. Today, we will go over how animals communicate, differences in animal and human communication, and how scientists are trying to teach animals to communicate in human-like ways. Different animals and insects communicate in many different ways. Animals are able to use verbal and nonverbal communication to communicate. Some examples of nonverbal communication include non-vocal auditory outbursts, bioluminescence, scent markings, chemical or tactile cues, visual signals, and postural gestures. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, bioluminescence is when an animal or insect uses chemical emissions of light to communicate with one another. A prime example of an insect that does this is the firefly. Fireflies are able to say different things by blinking their light slower or faster. Dolphins slapping their tail in water is an example of a non-vocal auditory outburst. A non-vocal auditory outburst is when an animal makes a noise to communicate using something other than their mouth. An interesting thing about some animal species is that they can pick up different dialects. There are certain species of birds that are able to do this. According to scientist and researcher Benjamin Pritchard of NBC News, an Australian species of bird, the New Holland honeyeaters and the white-brown scrubburns are two species that are able to do this. This occurs because these birds live by other bird species. Therefore, they pick up the dialects of these other bird species while still having their own. This makes them bilingual. Another way in which animals are able to communicate is by using visual displays. A very good example of this is a peacock flaunting its feathers, as shown in this picture, in order to attract a mate. I find the most interesting form of communication is the way in which bees communicate. Bees communicate through dance. Human and animal communication differ in many ways. Humans have a far more advanced way of communicating. In the human language, a lot of words or actions that are said or done can have more than one meaning. With animals, every sign or call or vocal outburst means only one thing. Everything that needs to be communicated can only be expressed in one way. Animals are very limited to what they can say because of the way in which they communicate. To communicate our language, us humans have a virtually unlimited number of things we can say due to our language. Also, our language is able to evolve and change relatively quickly due to our culture and society. If animals' languages do change, it takes a long time through evolution. Another major difference is that animals are born knowing their language and can communicate the second they hit the ground, and other animals will be able to know what they are saying. Whereas humans are born with the ability to be able to learn their language, but they do not know it right away and they have to be taught. Many studies and experiments have been conducted to try and teach certain animals to learn different ways of communication. Animals are actually very smart and teachable. Monkeys are the most closely related species to humans. There are many cases where humans have taught apes to communicate. In 1999, in an experiment conducted by a scientist and professor named Dwayne Rumbaugh, a chimpanzee was taught to communicate in an Atlanta zoo. This chimp wasn't actually able to say things using words, but it was able to learn how to communicate using a keyboard that made a voice as the chimp told it what to say. This chimp named Panbanisha had a vocabulary of over 3,000 words. She was taught symbols, and these symbols were on the keyboard as she typed her thoughts to form sentences. This chimpanzee was also able to express what other chimps were thinking to the researchers that conducted this experiment. She could tell the researchers that her mom was hungry and wanted a banana. This experiment proves that animals are able to be taught ways to communicate, in other ways than what they already know, and that they are actually really smart when it comes to communication. How animals communicate, differences in human and animal communication, and scientists trying to teach animals to communicate in human-like ways currently and in the present are all things we went over today. Now, maybe the next time you look over at your animal and he's doing something weird, and you see that, maybe you'll realize that he's trying to communicate with you, and maybe you'll actually be able to figure out what he is trying to say.